The council chamber floated in the darkness of space, its crystalline walls reflecting the dying light of Veltara Prime. Counselor Tay Min stood before the assembled representatives of 17 alien civilizations, his scaled hands trembling as he delivered the final report. The numbers were clear and merciless. 6 months. That was all the time his people had left before their sun collapsed and took their entire solar system with it. The other counselors offered their sympathy. Some spoke of prayers to the ancient precursors, the godlike beings who had established the laws that governed all civilized species. Others promised to preserve Veltaran culture in their archives, to remember them after they were gone, but none offered solutions. The greatest scientific minds in the galaxy had examined the problem and reached the same conclusion. Nothing could be done. Taemin returned to his quarters feeling hollow. 3 billion souls on 5 planets, all counting on him to find an answer that did not exist. He had always been a faithful follower of the ancient laws, always trusted that the precursors had established order for good reason. But faith felt thin when measured against extinction. The door chimed. Dr. Hanul entered without waiting for permission, her eyes bright with something dangerous. Hope, perhaps. Or madness. She carried a data tablet that trembled in her grip. "I found something in the deep archives," Hanul said. "Something old, something forbidden." Taemin gestured for her to continue, though dread coiled in his stomach. Hanul activated the tablet. Ancient text appeared, written in 17 languages, each one belonging to a founding species of the Galactic Council. This record dates back 4,000 years. It describes a species that the precursors encountered and then banned from contact. Banned? Taemin leaned forward. The precursors welcomed all intelligent life. Why would they forbid contact with anyone? That's what interested me. Hanul scrolled through the document. The species calls themselves humans. According to this, the precursors didn't ban them because they were violent or primitive. They banned them because they were dangerous in a different way. She read from the ancient text, her voice steady despite the weight of the words. The humans are solution makers. They solve what cannot be solved. They break what cannot be broken. They do not accept the word impossible. Never call them unless extinction is certain, for they will change everything. This is not a suggestion. This is divine law. Taemin felt his blood chill. The precursors were gods. If they feared these humans, there's more. Hanul swiped to another section. The precursors left something, an emergency beacon hidden in Vault Omega beneath the council station. It has never been activated. The instructions say it will reach the humans, wherever they are, and they will come. But the warning is repeated 7 times in 7 different ways. Only press this button if your species faces total annihilation and you are willing to accept the consequences of changing the natural order. Where are these humans now? Taemin asked. Unknown. They were exiled beyond the galactic rim 4,000 years ago. They could be extinct themselves, or evolved into something unrecognizable, or waiting. Hanul set down the tablet. But if the precursors were afraid of them, if they felt the need to create a forbidden protocol, then maybe they can do what our gods could not. Taemin finished. They sat in silence. Outside the window, Veltara Prime pulsed with sick, irregular light. Somewhere down on the surface, Taemin's family prepared for the evacuation that would never come, packing belongings for a journey to nowhere. "Show me the vault," he said finally. Ji Woo, the young communications officer, met them at Vault Omega. She had been monitoring deep space frequencies for years, hoping against hope for some miracle transmission that might save them. When Hanul explained what they had found, Ji Woo's face went pale. "The gods said no," she whispered. "The precursors established that law for a reason." "The gods are gone," Taemin said, more harshly than he intended. "And we are about to follow them." The vault door required authorization from a sitting counselor. Taemin placed his hand on the scanner, feeling the weight of what he was about to do. The door hissed open, revealing a chamber that had been sealed since the council station was built. Dust hung in the stale air, and there, in the center of the room, sat a pedestal with a single red button. It looked so simple, so small, just a piece of colored metal that would move when pressed. But the inscriptions around the pedestal made its purpose clear in 17 languages. Emergency Contact Protocol. Use only when extinction is certain and all other options are exhausted. Warning: the humans do not follow our ways. They will change everything they touch. 3 billion people, Hanyul said softly. 3 billion lives against the word of dead gods. Taemin looked at his companions. Jiwoo was crying silently, torn between faith and desperation. Hanyul stood rigid, her scientific mind warring with 4,000 years of religious conditioning. And Taemin himself, a counselor sworn to uphold the ancient laws, stood ready to commit the greatest heresy in galactic history. He thought of his children, his mate, the artists and scientists and ordinary people going about their final days, unaware that their leader stood on the edge of breaking divine law. What right did he have to make this choice for all of them? But what right did he have not to try? Taemin reached out. His hand hovered over the button. The chamber held its breath. 4,000 years of prohibition. 4,000 years of wondering what the humans were, what made the gods themselves fear them enough to hide them away beyond the edge of known space. "Forgive me," Taemin whispered, though he did not know if he spoke to the precursors, to his people, or to whatever was about to answer the call. He pressed the button. Nothing happened for 3 seconds. Then the pedestal began to glow with soft blue light. Ancient mechanisms activated, sending a signal out into the void, faster than light itself, piercing the barriers between dimensions to reach whatever waited in the darkness beyond the galactic rim. The message was simple: help us. And somewhere, impossibly far away, something heard and began moving toward them at speeds that should not exist. The alarm woke Taemin from a restless sleep 72 hours after he pressed the button. Jiwoo's voice crackled through his communicator, high and tight with fear. "They're here! The humans are here!" Taemin rushed to the observation deck, still fastening his counselor robes. Impossible. Every calculation said it would take months, maybe years, for anyone to cross the distance from the galactic rim. Yet there it was, hanging in space like a verdict. A ship. It was not beautiful. The alien vessels Taemin knew were elegant, flowing things of graceful curves and artistic design. This human ship looked like someone had bolted together a dozen different machines and hoped for the best. Panels were welded over what might have been battle damage. The hull was scarred and patched. Parts of it seemed to be held together with materials that did not match. It looked like it should fall apart if anyone breathed on it too hard, but it had crossed a quarter of the galaxy in 3 days. "They're requesting permission to dock," Jiwoo said, her voice shaking. "What do I tell them?" "Let them come," Taemin said. "We called them. Now we face what we have summoned." The other counselors assembled in the main docking bay, their fear almost visible in the air. Guards stood ready, though their weapons seemed foolish now. What could blasters do against beings that the precursors themselves had feared? The airlock cycled. The door opened. The first human stepped through, and Taemin felt shock ripple through the assembled aliens. The humans looked small, fragile. They stood upright on 2 legs like several other species, but their bodies were soft, unarmored. No scales, no thick hide, no natural weapons visible. They wore simple uniforms that seemed designed for function rather than intimidation. The leader, identified by insignia as Captain Dong Ha, had dark hair graying at the temples and eyes that measured everything with quick, sharp intelligence. "Counselor Taemin?" Dong Ha's voice was rough, but not unkind. He spoke perfect galactic standard, though with an accent that suggested his species' mouth was not designed for these sounds. "I'm Captain Dong Ha of the human vessel Perseverance. I understand you have a son that's misbehaving." The casual tone shocked the assembly into silence. Taemin finally found his voice. "You came so quickly." "Our calculation suggested that we'd take months." A human female stepped forward, her uniform marking her as an engineer. "You calculated based on conventional faster-than-light travel. We don't do conventional." She smiled, showing flat teeth that marked humans as omnivores. "I'm Hyun-Soo, Chief Engineer. When we got your beacon, we stopped doing anything conventional and started doing anything necessary." A third human approached, this one carrying data equipment. "Xenobiologist Young M.E., she introduced herself. "I specialize in first contact protocols and interspecies psychology. May I say, Counselor, that it took tremendous courage to press that button. We know the precursors forbade contact with us." "Why?" Taemin asked, unable to stop himself. "Why did they fear you?" Young Mai exchanged glances with her companions. Dong Ha shrugged. "The short answer? We don't know when to quit. The precursors valued order, balance, accepting the natural way of things. We're the species that looks at the natural way of things and says, that's a suggestion, not a rule." "Our history is nothing but impossible situations," Hyun-Soo added. "Ice ages that should have killed us, plagues that should have ended our species, wars we started and somehow survived. We nearly went extinct about 7 times before we figured out space travel. We're professionals at surviving the unsurvivable." "Which brings us to your problem." Dong Ha pulled out a handheld device. "We need to see all your data on the stellar collapse. Everything you have, every analysis, every failed solution." Ha-Nul stepped forward, offering her own data tablet. The humans huddled around it, their faces illuminated by the glow of impossible mathematics. Taemin watched them work, noting how they moved with efficient purpose, how they spoke in partial sentences that the others completed, how they referenced concepts and technologies he had never heard of. After 6 hours of studying the data in a side chamber, the humans returned to the assembly. Every alien scientist had already reviewed the same information. Everyone had concluded the same thing. The stellar collapse could not be stopped or slowed. The Veltaran system was doomed. Hyun-Soo laughed. The sound was so unexpected, so inappropriate, that several counselors gasped in offense. But Hyun-Soo was grinning, her eyes bright. "You've all been trying to stop it. That's your mistake. The star is going to collapse. You can't prevent it. So we're not going to try." "Then what?" Ha-Nul began. "We're going to use it," Dong Ha said. "The collapse is going to release more energy than you can imagine. We're going to capture that energy and use it to move your entire solar system." Silence fell. Finally, a counselor from the Thulmore species spoke, his voice dripping with disdain. "Move a solar system? That's impossible." "Impossible is just a word," Young Mi said gently. "And words have never stopped us before." Hyun-Soo was already sketching on a holographic display. "We build an energy web around the star. When it collapses, we channel the released energy through dimensional focal points to create a controlled wormhole. Your planets, your moons, everything in your system passes through to a new location with a stable star. Yes, it's never been done. Yes, the math makes my brain hurt. Yes, there are about 17 ways it could go catastrophically wrong. But it's possible." "Theoretically possible," Ha-Nul said, her scientific training warring with sudden, desperate hope. "All the best things start as theoretical," Dong Ha said. He turned to Taemin. "We're going to need time, resources, and permission to do some things that will probably violate several of your safety regulations. We're also going to need you to trust us, which I understand is asking a lot from people whose gods specifically said not to call us. Tai Min looked at the three humans standing before him. They were smaller than Veltarans, softer, seemingly weaker. They came in a ship that looked like it was held together with spare parts and stubborn refusal to fall apart. Their plan was insane. But they had crossed the galaxy in 3 days. They had heard a cry for help that violated divine law and come anyway. They stood in a room full of species more physically impressive than themselves and radiated absolute confidence that they could do the impossible. "The gods told us not to call you," Tai Min said slowly. "But the gods are not the ones facing extinction. We are." He extended his hand in the Veltaran gesture of alliance. Dong Ha looked at it, then took it in his own softer, warmer hand and shook it in what must be the human equivalent. "Then let's get to work," Dong Ha said. "We've got a solar system to save and about 5 months to figure out how." As the humans began outlining their requirements, Ji-Woo leaned close to Tai Min and whispered, "Do you think they can really do it?" Tai Min watched Hyun-Soo arguing animatedly with Ha-Newell about energy conversion rates, both scientists falling into the universal language of mathematics and desperate innovation. He watched Young Mi calmly explaining human psychology to confused counselors. He watched Dong Ha organizing tasks with the efficiency of someone who had faced impossible odds before and won. "I think," Tai Min said quietly, "that the precursors forbade contact because they knew exactly what would happen. These humans will try, and trying when everyone else has given up might be the most dangerous thing in the universe." The arrival of the human fleet changed everything. 17 ships materialized over the course of a week, each one as patched and worn as the Perseverance, each one carrying equipment that made Veltaran scientists stare in confusion and wonder. The fleet commander, Admiral Sunja, was a stern woman with silver hair and eyes that had seen things she would never speak about. She moved with the confidence of someone who had won battles that should have been losses. "We don't have time for careful," Sunja announced at the first joint planning session. "We have time for fast and functional. That means we work in shifts of 18 hours, sleep 3, and repeat. Anyone who can't keep up needs to say so now." No one spoke up. The Veltarans were facing extinction. The humans were offering salvation. Complaining about work schedules seemed absurd. Tai Min watched from the observation deck as the humans began constructing their framework around Veltara Prime. It was like watching a dance performed at triple speed. Human workers in spacesuits moved with purpose and precision, assembling massive structures that defied his understanding of physics. Gravity anchors, they called them. Reality stabilizers. Quantum threading arrays. The words meant nothing to him, but Ha-Newell was nearly vibrating with excitement as she worked alongside the human specialist named Bo-Ra. Bo-Ra was young by human standards, Tai Min had learned, barely 30 years old. But she spoke in mathematical equations the way poets spoke in verse, seeing patterns in stellar mechanics that had escaped every Veltaran scientist. She and Ha-Newell had formed a partnership that transcended species, both of them working through the night, sharing data and theories, building something that existed at the edge of possible and impossible. "The energy web needs to be perfect," Bo-Ra explained during one briefing, her hands moving rapidly as she manipulated holographic displays. "When the star collapses, it will release energy equivalent to 1 billion fusion bombs. If even one thread of our web fails, that energy will destroy everything in a light-year radius. No pressure." She said it with a smile that Tai Min was learning to recognize as human humor, joking about terrible things as a way to manage fear. The work continued at a pace that exhausted the Veltarans and seemed normal to the humans. Tai Min often found human workers still active when he returned from rest periods, their eyes red but their hands steady. They consumed a bitter brown liquid they called coffee in quantities that seemed medically dangerous. They ate while they worked, slept in their workstations, and treated time as a resource to be spent rather than managed. "How do you maintain this pace?" Taemin asked Dong Ha one night, finding the captain reviewing engineering reports at 3 in the morning. Dong Ha looked up, and for a moment, the exhaustion showed. "We're human," he said simply. "On our home world, our ancestors were persistence hunters. We didn't run faster than our prey, we just ran longer. We chased animals until they collapsed from exhaustion, and then we kept going. It's in our bones, counselor. We don't know how to quit." The observation made Taiman's skin prickle. "You evolved as terminators, creatures that just keep coming. That's one way to put it." Dong Ha smiled tiredly. "We prefer to think of it as optimism, backed by stubborn refusal to acknowledge reality." Not everyone was pleased with the human presence. Nalvek, a council enforcer from the Thulmor species, had been assigned to monitor human activities and ensure they followed galactic law. He grew more agitated each day as he reviewed the human work. "They're using forbidden technologies," Nalvek reported to Taemin, his voice sharp with alarm. "These gravity manipulations, these dimensional threads, this is precursor-level work. The ancient laws specifically prohibit tampering with the fundamental forces of reality." "The ancient laws also prohibited contact with humans," Taemin replied. "I have already broken divine law. What's a few more violations?" But he understood Nalvek's fear. The humans were not just fixing a problem. They were reshaping reality itself, bending the rules of physics in ways that should not be possible. Every day the energy web grew larger, its threads reaching deeper into the fabric of space and time. It was beautiful and terrifying. The cultural exchanges happened in the margins between work. Young Mai had established a small library of human history and culture, available to any Velteran who wanted to understand their saviors. Taimin spent hours reading through the records, his horror and fascination growing with each page. Humans had nearly destroyed themselves dozens of times. Wars that killed millions. Weapons that could sterilize planets. Environmental collapse. Resource depletion. Political insanity. Yet somehow, each time they stood on the brink of extinction, they had pulled themselves back. They had looked at impossible situations and found solutions that required sacrifice, cooperation, and a stubborn refusal to accept death. "You're a species of last-minute miracles," Hanul said to Bo-Ra one evening, both of them exhausted after another 18-hour shift. "We're a species of survivors," Bo-Ra corrected. "Miracles are just what happens when you refuse to stop trying." 2 months into the project, disaster struck. The stellar collapse accelerated. New readings showed the star's core was destabilizing faster than any model had predicted. They no longer had 5 months. They had 3. Taimin expected panic. He expected the humans to call off the project, to admit defeat, to evacuate who they could, and abandon the rest. Instead, Sunja gathered her people and said 3 words: "We work faster." And they did. The pace that had seemed impossible became more impossible. Shifts extended to 20 hours. The coffee consumption reached levels that made Velteran doctors worry about human health. The energy web grew at a rate that defied physics, fed by human determination and engineering that bent the rules. But it was not enough. Everyone could see the calculations. They would finish the web, but barely. If anything went wrong, if there were any delays, if a single component failed. Hyun-Soo approached Tai-Min with a request that made his blood run cold. "We need evacuation protocols," she said. "Your most important cultural artifacts, your genetic samples, your historical records, your best and brightest. They need to be on our ships, ready to go." "Just in case," Taimin said, understanding the unspoken words. Just in case, Hyun-soo confirmed. It was admitting the possibility of failure. It was acknowledging that even human stubbornness might not be enough, but it was also practical, pragmatic, and deeply, achingly kind. Even if the plan failed, even if the Veltaran worlds were lost, the humans would save what they could. The evacuation began quietly, museum pieces loaded onto cargo ships, genetic banks transferred to human vessels, families with young children boarding shuttles, tears streaming down their faces as they left their homes possibly forever. And through it all, the humans worked, their hands steady, their eyes tired but determined. Ji-woo found Taemin in his quarters 3 days before the projected collapse. "They're going to die for us, aren't they?" she asked. "If something goes wrong, those ships holding the energy web will be at ground zero. And they know it." "They know it," Taemin agreed, "and they haven't slowed down for even a moment." The final component installation began. The energy web was complete, its threads spreading across space like a spider's creation made of light and mathematics. The human ships took their positions, becoming living anchors for the framework. Soonja stood on the bridge of her flagship, her voice calm and clear as she gave the order. "Anchor the threads. Set dimensional focal points. Prepare for stellar collapse sequence." She paused, and Taemin, watching from a human vessel where he had been evacuated, saw her take a breath. "We're going to thread a needle with a solar system. Let's make sure our aim is true." The star began its death throes. Reality itself seemed to hold its breath. And the humans, these small, soft, impossible beings, stood ready to catch a collapsing sun and use it to save a species they had been forbidden to contact. The energy web came alive exactly as planned. When Veltara Prime began its final collapse, the human framework caught the released energy like a net catching falling stars. The dimensional threads glowed bright enough to be seen from the surface of the Veltaran homeworld. For 3 minutes, it worked perfectly. The energy was being channeled, controlled, redirected toward the focal points that would open the wormhole to safety. Then something else woke up. It appeared without warning, materializing in space as if it had always been there, and they simply had not noticed. The construct was massive, geometric, and clearly not natural. Its surface was covered in symbols that made Taemin's eyes hurt to look at. It radiated wrongness, a sense of violated order that made everyone who saw it feel suddenly, deeply afraid. "Precursor technology," Nalvek whispered, his voice filled with religious terror. "A guardian. The gods left a guardian." The construct did not announce itself. It did not issue warnings. It simply began destroying the human energy web with weapons that erased matter from existence. Where its beams touched the framework threads, reality itself seemed to forget those threads had ever been there. Alarms screamed across all human ships. The careful balance of the energy web began to collapse. If it failed completely, the stellar energy would be released in an uncontrolled burst that would sterilize the entire system. "Evasive pattern," Soonja ordered, her voice sharp but controlled. "Maintain the framework at all costs." The human ships scattered, moving to avoid the Guardians' attacks, while somehow keeping the energy threads stable. It was like watching someone dance on a knife edge during an earthquake. Taemin could barely breathe as he watched ship after ship dodge annihilation by seconds, their pilots performing maneuvers that should have torn the vessels apart. "Incoming transmission," a human communications officer reported. "The construct is broadcasting. It's in old precursor dialect." Young Mi, who had studied precursor languages, went pale as she translated. It says it is Protocol Omega, a failsafe left by the precursors to prevent anyone from achieving their level of technological advancement. It will destroy anyone who attempts to manipulate fundamental forces of reality." She looked up, her eyes wide. "It specifically mentions preventing the rise of species who refuse to accept natural limits." It's here for us, Dongha said quietly. The precursors didn't just exile humans, they left a weapon to kill anyone who showed human characteristics, the determination to break physical laws. Elder Myung-hee, a human philosopher who had been quiet throughout the mission, finally spoke. The precursors were not evil. They feared chaos. They feared what happens when beings refuse to accept the order of the universe, and we humans are chaos incarnate. We look at a law of physics and treat it as a suggestion. The Guardian construct fired again, and this time its beam struck true. One of the smaller human ships, the Determination, lost its port side to the weapon's reality-erasing effect. The ship spun wildly, its energy thread flickering. "Determination is critical," someone shouted. "They're losing containment." But instead of evacuating, the crew of the Determination somehow stabilized their wounded ship. Through static-filled communications, Taemin heard Hyun-Soo's voice. She had been aboard that vessel, supervising a key focal point. "Determination to fleet. We're still functional. Rerouting power. Give us 2 minutes and we'll have this thread back online." "You need to evacuate," Dongha ordered. "We evacuate, this whole thing falls apart," Hyun-Soo replied. 2 minutes. "We've got this." But they did not have 2 minutes. The Guardian construct was systematically targeting the human framework now. Having identified it as the source of the reality manipulation it was programmed to prevent. Its attacks were precise, intelligent, designed to dismantle the energy web one thread at a time. Bo-Ra was working frantically at a console, her hands moving faster than Taemin's eyes could follow. Hanul stood beside her, feeding calculations, both scientists racing to understand the Guardian's nature. "It exists partially outside normal space-time," Bo-Ra said. "That's how it appeared from nowhere. It's anchored in higher dimensions. We can't destroy it with conventional weapons because most of it isn't even in our reality." "Can we outrun it?" Soonja asked. "No," Hanel said, her voice breaking. "It's faster than our ships. It will pick us apart before we can complete the wormhole transit." Silence fell on the bridge. The Guardian construct fired again. Another human ship took damage, though not as severe as the Determination. The stellar collapse continued, uncaring of the battle happening around it. The energy levels were rising. In minutes, they would reach the critical point where the wormhole must be opened or the entire system would be destroyed. "There has to be a way," Jiwoo said desperately. "The humans always find a way." Dongha laughed, but it was not a happy sound. "Of course there's a way. There's always a way. It's just not a way everyone survives." Hyun-Soo's voice crackled over the communications again. "I have an idea. It's insane. But then again, everything about this mission is insane." "Explain," Soonja ordered. "The Guardian can't be destroyed because it exists in higher dimensions. But the stellar collapse is releasing energy in all dimensions. If we channel the energy pulse directly into the Guardian's position, we can overload its defenses. It will be forced to retreat to its higher dimensional anchor to survive." "For how long?" Bo-Ra asked. "Exactly 3.7 seconds, Hyun-Soo said. "Long enough to complete the wormhole transit if everything goes perfectly." "And the ships maintaining the energy threads during that pulse?" Soonja asked, though her voice suggested she already knew the answer. "They'll have to stay in position to keep the framework stable," Hyun-Soo said softly. "The energy levels during those 3 seconds will be unsurvivable." "Any ship holding a thread will be caught in the pulse." The math was simple and terrible. 7 ships held the critical threads, the ones that could not be automated or abandoned without collapsing the entire framework. 7 ships with crews totaling 2,847 human beings. They would have to remain in position, holding the threads stable while energy that could destroy stars washed over them. "Request volunteers," Soonja said, her voice steady despite the horror of what she was ordering. She did not finish the sentence before every single crew member on those 7 ships responded. No hesitation, no debate, just immediate acknowledgement that they understood and accepted. Tae-min felt something break inside him. These beings had known his people for 2 months. 2 months. And they were volunteering to die for them without question, without bargaining, without even seeming to consider it a difficult choice. "Why?" he whispered, though he did not mean to speak aloud. Myung-hee heard him. The elderly human turned, and her eyes were wet with tears, but also bright with something fierce and proud. "Because someone has to give a damn," she said. "Because we look at the universe and all its rules about what's impossible, and we choose to care anyway. The precursors feared us not because we're violent, not because we're chaotic. They feared us because we will burn ourselves to light someone else's way, and we don't even think it's strange." The evacuation of non-essential personnel began. Families of the volunteer crews were already aboard other ships, already safe. Many were watching, knowing what was about to happen, unable to stop it. Soonja herself transferred to the flagship Endurance, taking personal command of one of the 7 ships that would not escape. Her second officer protested. She silenced him with a look. "I gave the order. I hold a thread." The countdown began. The 7 ships moved into final position. Tae-min watched Hyun-soo on the determination, her face calm as she made final adjustments. He watched Soonja standing on her bridge, back straight, eyes forward. He watched the other crews, these humans he barely knew, preparing to die for a species whose gods had forbidden their very existence. "All ships report ready," a voice announced. "Stellar collapse reaching critical point, energy pulse in 30 seconds. "This is Soonja to all volunteer vessels," the admiral said, her voice carrying to every ship in the fleet. "It has been an honor to serve with you. Tell them we were happy to help." And the humans, facing death in the coldest mathematics, replied with their species' oldest tradition. "See you on the other side, Admiral." The stellar collapse reached its peak with a brilliance that should have been the end of everything. Veltara Prime died in a cascade of fusion that released energy equivalent to 1 billion stars. But the human energy web caught it all, every particle, every wave, every scream of matter transforming into pure force. The dimensional threads blazed with light bright enough to see across star systems. The Guardian construct, sensing the energy pulse, began to retreat into higher dimensions, just as Hyun-soo had predicted. For exactly 3.7 seconds, it would be vulnerable. Its defenses overloaded, its attention focused on survival rather than attack. 3.7 seconds to move 5 planets, 2 moons, 17 cities, and 3 billion souls across 4,000 light-years of space. "Open the wormhole!" Soonja commanded. The energy web contracted, reality screamed, and space itself tore open. The wormhole appeared, a tunnel through dimensions that violated every law of physics the Veltarans had ever known. It was beautiful and terrible, a wound in the universe that nonetheless led to salvation. The Veltaran system began to move, not the ships, not the people. The entire solar system, planets and all, sliding into impossible space, traversing distances that should require millennia in heartbeats. Tae-min felt reality bend around him, felt his stomach rebel against sensations that organic beings were never meant to experience. Through the viewport, he watched his homeworld shift through colors that had no names, watched stars blur past in streams of light. But he could not look away from the 7 ships. The volunteer vessels held their positions, becoming living anchors for the energy threads even as the stellar pulse washed over them. Their shields failed in the first second. Their hulls began to superheat in the second, and in the third second the ship started to come apart. "Determination is breaking up," someone reported, voice choked with tears. Through static and interference, Hyun-soo's voice came one last time. "The math is good. The trajectory is perfect." A pause, and then, quietly, as if she were commenting on the weather. "This is determination. We're gone. Get them home." Her ship exploded, dissolving into light and fragments. But the energy thread she had been holding remained stable, locked in place by her final calculations, maintained by systems that somehow continued working even as the ship that housed them ceased to exist. One by one, the other volunteer ships followed. The Steadfast, the Unyielding, the Promise. 4 ships gone in 3 seconds, and still the threads held. Tai Min saw Sunja on the view screen of the Endurance, saw her standing straight even as her bridge filled with fire. Her last words were crisp and clear. "Tell them we were happy to help." The flagship died. 5 ships, 2,847 people. Gone. But the wormhole held. The Veltaran system continued its impossible journey. 2 ships remained. The Defiance and the Last Light, their crews fighting to keep systems online as their vessels disintegrated around them. "We're not going to make it," the captain of the Defiance reported. "Hull breach on all decks. Reactors critical, but the thread is stable. Repeat, the thread is stable." "Last Light confirming," came the other ship's response. "We'll hold as long as we can." The remaining 2 ships bought precious seconds with their lives. The Defiance went first, her reactor overloading in a flash that briefly outshone the dead sun behind them. The Last Light followed moments later, her crew singing something in a human language Tai Min did not understand, their voices cutting off mid-verse. 7 ships, 7 crews, all gone, but the wormhole completed its cycle. The Veltaran system emerged into normal space 4,000 light-years from where it had started, orbiting a young, stable star that would burn for billions of years. 5 planets, 2 moons, 3 billion souls, all intact, all alive. The silence on the surviving human ships was deafening. Then someone started crying. Then everyone was crying, including the humans who had lived, mourning the humans who had not. Taemin collapsed in his seat, unable to process what had just happened. They had succeeded. The impossible had been done. But the cost? Jiwoo found him hours later, staring out at their new sun. "They knew," she said quietly. "From the moment they heard our beacon, they knew this might happen, and they came anyway." "Why?" Taemin asked. The same question he had asked before, but now with the weight of 2,847 deaths behind it. "Because someone had to give a damn," Jiwoo repeated Myung-hee's words. "And humans always do." The memorial began immediately. The Veltarans gathered every name, every face, every detail of the lives that had been sacrificed for theirs. They built a monument of 17 pillars, one for each human ship that had participated in the rescue. The 7 tallest pillars bore the names of those who had not returned, carved in stone that would last longer than stars. Taemin himself inscribed the first name, Admiral Sunja, who had given the order and then followed it to the end. He worked through the night carving each name with his own hands, the least he could do for beings who had given everything. Dong Ha attended the memorial ceremony, one of the senior human survivors. He stood before the pillars, his face carved with grief, and spoke for all humans. They were not soldiers following orders. They were volunteers who saw people in need and decided that was enough. That has always been enough for us. Young-mi established the first human embassy on the Veltaran homeworld in a city that now orbited a sun it had never known existed until 2 months ago. The embassy's motto, carved above its door in both human and Veltaran scripts, "Someone has to give a damn." Hanul and Bora published their joint research, revolutionizing galactic understanding of stellar engineering and dimensional manipulation. The paper was dedicated to the 2,047 who held the threads. It became required reading at every scientific institution in the galaxy. The Galactic Council met for the first time since the rescue. The prohibition on human contact remained, but now it carried an addendum written by Taimin himself. Call them only when hope is lost. But know this: humans are the ones who find hope in impossible places. They are dangerous, not because they are violent, but because they care when caring seems foolish. They will sacrifice when sacrifice seems wasteful. They will try when trying seems pointless. The precursors feared them, and perhaps the precursors were wise. But we called them, and we live because they answered. Decades passed. The Veltaran civilization thrived in its new home, building cities and families and futures that would have been impossible without human intervention. Children grew up learning the names of the 2,847, learning why pressing the forbidden button had been the right choice. Taimin, old now and gray, made a pilgrimage to Earth. The human home world was nothing like he expected: chaotic, vibrant, covered in cities and nature in equal measure. He was brought to a memorial wall listing human lives lost in service to others. The Veltaran rescue was one entry among thousands. "You do this often," Taimin said to his guide. "Sacrifice for others." "It's what we do," the guide replied simply. A young human child approached, no more than 6 years old, eyes wide with curiosity. "Are you the alien who pressed the button?" she asked. Taimin knelt down to her level. "Yes, I am." "Was it scary?" "It was terrifying," Taimin admitted. "But it was also the moment we learned the most important lesson in the universe." "What's that?" "That the gods may set the rules, but sometimes the right choice is to break them. And if you are very lucky, there are humans nearby when you do." The child considered this seriously, then reached out and touched his hand. "I'm glad you pressed it." "So am I," Taimin said, his voice thick with emotion. "So am I." He stood before the memorial wall, before the replica of the button he had pressed so long ago. His hand shook as he reached out and touched it, feeling the cold metal under his fingers, remembering the weight of that choice. "Would you press it again?" the child asked, still watching him with those curious human eyes. Taimin did not hesitate. Every single time. Because that was the truth the humans had taught him. Some choices were worth making, no matter the cost. Some rules were worth breaking, no matter the consequences. And some beings, rare and precious and impossibly stubborn, would always answer when someone cried for help. The gods had forbidden seeking human aid. The gods had been right to fear them. But the gods were not the ones who had to survive. The gods were not the ones who needed hope when hope seemed lost. The gods were not the ones who needed someone to give a damn when the universe said caring was pointless. The humans were. And Taimin, standing in the memorial garden on Earth, surrounded by the names of those who had died saving strangers, understood why the precursors had hidden them away. Not because humans were evil, not because they were chaotic, but because they represented the most dangerous idea in the universe, that caring was enough, that trying was enough, that sometimes refusing to quit was the most powerful force in existence. The button had been forbidden, the button had been pressed, and 3 billion souls lived because someone had been brave enough to break divine law, and someone else had been human enough to answer.